There's already too many people to introduce individually, so I'll just quickly say that Michael is here. He's the one with the Svalbard mountain by the sea in the background, holding his hand up. And are you in Hamburg, Michael?
Yes, I'm in Hamburg.
Right, and that's where Olympus Europe's HQ is. Michael has been with Olympus now for 11 years, I think. So, and previously to that, he was with another photo industry company in Germany. I'm going to basically go through the questions which have been submitted on the forum, and I'm going to go through them one by one. And what I'd like to do is, I'm going to try and identify the person who made the question, and if they would like to ask that question in their own voice, I can read it out for them if you like. But it'd be nice to have some participation. So actually, Graham is the first person. He got in really early. So Graham, have you got your question? You need to turn your mic on.
Yeah, I have indeed. Many years ago, with the OM4 TIs, we had multi-spot metering. Now that was taken through to the digital in the C8080, and it's something which I used extensively, especially in high contrast, high ratio lighting situations. And I'm wondering, would they ever consider bringing that feature back, as other manufacturers have?
Whether Olympus bring it back, or what was the question?
Well, the multi-spot metering.
Yeah, but whether we are thinking about bringing back or yeah. Actually, I'm not so used in this functionality by myself, because the C8080 was before my time, and I never used personally an OM camera. At this time, at the analog times, I used an old Minolta in the beginning of my career, photographic career. As far as I know, there is no intention to include this functionality in the current cameras at the moment. But I'm also not aware of every development in Japan. But as far as I know, there is no intention at the moment to do that.
Now,
okay. Thank you.
I'm going to be a bit cheeky here, and just
let me add something. As we have also the possibility to feed back something to Japan from our side, I'm happy to put that on a list, on our list, or on a question list, whether that would be possible in future.
Yes,
much appreciated.
I was just going to say, I was going to be cheeky and say that while Michael is probably not going to be able to answer some of the questions because they may be confidential or about products in the future which he's not at liberty to talk about. What I have found is that talking to many members of the photographic manufacturers is that they're always interested to hear about suggestions for improving their products, and I'm sure Olympus is no exception. So you can bear that in mind, I suppose, in your questions. Okay, so
just one comment to this, Ian. Ian said that I have been working for other company before I came to Olympus, and there I was in the position to get from all over the world the feedback what should be in a product, and you can imagine that you get a lot of feedback there. And normally it's like when you hear it once, then it's not important. When you hear it twice, then it gets interesting, and when you hear it more than twice, then might be an interesting functionality. So, and that's the reason why also our Japanese colleagues are always happy to get feedback from the market, that they can judge whether that's really a global need or just a single person who is asking for that, and whether it's worth to implement it or not. So therefore, every feedback in this direction is of course appreciated.
Yes.
So Ian, I don't know if you want to have supplementary questions or a discussion around these or not, or are we going to run short of time if we elaborate?
Yes, we have a lot of questions, so I'm a bit worried that we won't be able to get through them all. But if you have some quick...
Well, I was just going to comment that just sort of on Graham's point, that it seems to me with a mirrorless digital camera, spot metering and so on, it isn't really necessary, because you've got histograms, you've got over and under exposure indicators in the viewfinder, and also, of course, you can very easily take a number of shots around a bracketed exposure. So the necessity to have those sort of, spot and highlight metering that you had in the film days, when you couldn't review the picture, where you couldn't run off 6 or 10 frames just in case, it was important that you had some very sophisticated metering. But it seems to me these days, with modern digital cameras, they're already very good with the intelligent metering, and with the live view and the overexposure, underexposure controls that you have, it seems to me they're not really necessary. Now, that's probably going to provoke a long debate, which maybe we don't want to have, but it's just sort of from my point of view, it just seems that those things might have been useful in film days, but I honestly don't see, really why they'd be very important with a digital camera.
Now, I think I'm going to draw a line on that subject now, because we could discuss
too many questions
ad nauseum. But I think it'd be a great subject for a forum discussion. So it's a favourite question of Graham's, and I'm sure there are arguments pro and against. So I'm going to move on now. So I think it's Ron, isn't it? Ron, OM user. No, Jeremy, not Ron. Okay.
Yeah, I've seen the mistake appear in a few posts. No, it's no problem for me. I have 4 questions, but my first one, which I'll do now, and maybe Ian will let me put in the rest later. In the early days of the OMD cameras, we had battery grips.
What was that? Beck?
Someone else is talking.
Somebody's got their youngster and the microphone's on.
In the early days of the OMD cameras, we had a battery grip that you could screw onto the bottom of your camera and plug in a mains AC adapter. We've moved on a bit, and we're now getting USB charging of the battery in the camera. And if you're really lucky, with the right model, you can actually run your camera from USB-C power delivery. My question is there anything inherent in that technology, like the size or the heat consumption or the licensing of USB-C PD, that will preclude rolling out USB-C power delivery to the smaller form factor cameras, like the EM5 and the EM10 and perhaps the pens?
Understood. Actually, I'm not 100% sure, but I assume that the reason why the lower cameras don't have USB-C is that cost-wise, the licensing is too high for the lower cameras. So size-wise, I don't think, because the plug is not really bigger than the plug for micro USB, a little bit, but I would be surprised when this is the reason. I would say it's more like licensing costs that brings the price up from the lower models, and of course reduce then our margin, or increase your retail price. And I think that's the main reason why USB-C is only in the higher end models.
Thank you. Although I would be willing to pay just a little bit more for an EM5 that includes those features. Thank you.
Okay. Thank
you. That's a useful bit of feedback. Jeremy, I'll give you one more question. The one about the OLED screens.
Sorry, just trying to unmute. Yes, thank you. Yes, the EM51, the original one, came out with an OLED screen, which I found very good. Much darker blacks, very good color contrast, but it's the only model that had it, and you've gone back to LCD screens. I wondered what advantages there were for the camera in general, or Olympus to actually use LCD screens rather than OLED screens?
That's not correct. That the EM5 first model is the only one. EM10 models have also OLEDs.
My mistake.
But anyhow, there are two different points. OLEDs have, as you said, the advantage that they show a deeper black and a higher contrast. On the other hand, the color reproduction or the color correctness of LCDs are much better than of OLEDs still. And that's the reason why the higher end models in Olympus have LCDs and the lower end has OLEDs.
Thank you.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we have time for more Jeremy's questions, we'll come back. But is Goon525 here?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Michael, I've just treated myself to an EM1X to go alongside my EM1 Mark II, and the reason is that I'm a keen bird watcher and bird photographer. And my question to you is simply, the artificial intelligence which you've built into the 1X that works for trains, planes and cars, there has been talk of extending that for wildlife. Is there any sign of that happening?
As we introduced the EM1X 1 year ago, a little bit more than 1 year ago, we already said that we will update our algorithm for the intelligent subject detection in future. And I don't know 100% in which direction it's going, but I would be surprised when it's not going into wildlife, because wildlife is our main target group, especially for the EM1X. And when then all of a sudden Japan would come around the corner and will implement what can I imagine, model detection or something, or pet detection, then I would be surprised. So I would say when the next update comes for the subject detection, it's going in the direction of wildlife, but we have no information yet in this direction. But
Okay,
there will come something.
It sounds like it's coming, so we just have to be patient then. I know that machine learning requires a lot of input, so maybe they're still doing that. Okay, so the next one is Henry here from Malaysia? Probably not. Okay, so
yes, I am. I am.
You are. Okay, Henry. We can't see. We can. There you go. Henry's joining us from Kuala Lumpur.
Yes, Kuala Lumpur.
Right.
Malaysia.
So, do you have your question, or shall I read it out?
I think you have to read it out. I don't have it here with me.
That's fine. I would like to know when the new 100 to 400 with 1.25 built-in converter will become available and what it will cost.
Wow, good question. 150 to 400, I assume.
150 to 4, yeah.
150 to 400. We already announced it that it will come this year. So we are still on schedule. So we will release this lens this year. Price is not yet fixed. So the price is always a matter of discussion internal until the very last moment. So it's not fixed yet.
Hiya. Any chance of a glass of wine?
But you can imagine it would be more expensive than the 300mm 4.
Right.
No, I was also going to wonder, because with the Olympics being postponed, will the lens also be postponed?
Yeah.
No, the lens will not be postponed. It will come this year. We do have some struggles at the moment due to the coronavirus in some how should I say that, delivery chains, but the 150 to 400 is not affected. So it will come this year, but not yet decided which price it will have.
Okay. Now,
okay, thank you.
I'm going to give Henry one more question. He had set quite a few, but we can go back to the others if possible. So one question which we discussed with Andy Westlake last week, or week before last now, was, is there any chance of getting ISO and white balance on a single button? This is for the Mark III, isn't it?
Yes, Mark III.
Yes.
The OMD EM1 Mark III and the OMD 5 Mark III have the same problem.
You mean that you press one button and you get this menu where you can choose front and back tail?
I think so, yeah.
No, because in the previous Mark II of the OMD EM1, when you select a button for ISO, you get to have the front or the back dial for one is for white balance, one is for ISO. So now the thing is, when we select the button for ISO, we don't get the white balance anymore. We have to have a separate button just for the white balance. Unless we use the toggle switch, then we get both the ISO and the white balance. But that would defeat the purpose, is that we will be flipping the switch other than pressing a button, which is faster for users like me who is on a stage use.
Okay, understood. As beforehand with Graham, I take this with me and put this on a list. I know that EM1 Mark III is in scope for firmware updates, and Japan gets or collecting feedback. So let me put this on a list and ask our colleagues whether that is possible or not. That's what I can do.
Okay. Thanks very much. So we'll come back to more Henry, to more questions, Henry, later if we have time. Okay. Next one is Dr. Mark Farrington.
Ian, yes. Am I audible?
You
yes.
are.
Great, thank you. Again, I don't expect Michael to give a sort of definitive answer on this, but some general comments would be helpful. Many of us, for several reasons, would be interested in high quality, ultra wide angle prime lenses. There has been talk in the recent past of I think a fast 12mm lens, but at the moment, wider than that for a prime, other than the fisheye, one tends to have to go to manufacturers like Lower and so on for the 7.5, and they're weather sealed, for example. And there might be two potential ways of producing these: either modest aperture, so a very small high quality lens, which might be very useful, for example, for hiking and mountaineering, climbing, or a very fast lens, which would, for example, be good for particularly night photography and night sky and so on.
Mark, when you say 12mm, do you mean full frame 12mm? Because we have a 12mm f2 already.
Oh, yes, there was talk of a 1.2 there.
Ah, okay.
So shorter than 12mm, right?
I would be particularly interested in shorter than 12, but others would be interested in 12. Yeah.
Honestly, it's not the first time I hear this wish. We already feedbacked that to Tokyo several times. Have not get feedback on that, but I do hear that quite often, that people are looking for a wide angle, high quality lens. So far the 8mm fisheye is kind of interim solution, because you can also defish them, right?
Oh, it's a wonderful lens,
but,
yeah.
But I understand your request. As said, we already feedback that to Tokyo, that especially in Europe, there is some potential on that. So let's see. When you have this roadmap in mind, there are some prime lenses on. When you can remember that, so there's a question later on, I think, about the roadmap. The official one. There are some points on, but I don't know yet the focal length. So maybe that's coming something, but as said, no official feedback from Tokyo so far.
Okay. Then, thank you. Anyone else want to chip in on that, or shall I move on? Okay, I'll move on then. And in fact, you mentioned the roadmap. This is a question from Andy, who's Shenstone on the forum. So Andy, I'm going to ask you to read out your question, but at the same time, one of the other users, Snag 2000, he has a question. I'm going to read it out, unless he's here who wants to read it out. But he's asking basically about tilt shift. He would like to know whether there's a possibility of a tilt shift lens appearing at some time in the future. Now, I know this is almost an impossible question to answer from the product strategy point of view, but is there any technical reason why a tilt shift might be very difficult? I think that might be a kind of better question. But Andy, could you cover your question with the roadmap?
Well, do you want to ask? Let Michael answer that one first about tilt shifts.
Okay, all right then.
Technical wise, I don't think that there's a limitation, especially because when you look on our image circle or on our mount size, the mount size is quite big, and also the lens image circle. Therefore you can use shift the lens very far. So technical wise, I don't think that there is limitation in the system that tilt and shift lens would be possible. Actually, I would be surprised that there's a technical limitation. I think that's more or less, so I don't think that's impossible that's coming, something like that. But when you look on our strengths of the system, which is small, lightweight, and we are targeting mostly to wildlife nature photographer, I would say that's not the highest priority in our list to do. So when then a bit later, when we did some other lenses which are for our target group a bit more important, I think.
Okay, well that kind of segues quite well into Andy's question. Andy?
Yeah, so on the roadmap, you've got two lenses which are sort of in the 50 to 250-ish range in the Pro section at the top of the roadmap. I'd be interested to know if there's anything you can tell us about those, because the old 50 to 200 on the 4/3 rather than micro 4/3 was one of my favorite lenses. You know, it was something, and because I've got the 12 to 100, the 40 to 150 seems too much of an overlap. So I'm interested in that next section. Is there anything you can tell us about those two lenses?
No, unfortunately, we cannot talk about the future system or future products too much because a lot of things are confidential and also are still on discussion. So I think the final specification of those lenses are even not finalized yet. However, when you look what we have done in the past or what we are doing at the moment in our system. So we had these 2.8 lenses, the 714, the 40-150, and the 1240-40, right? 2.8, and now we are bringing 1245-40 lens. Then you might be able to judge why we have two lenses in a similar range in our roadmap. So.
And like I say, if the design's not chosen yet, you won't have any idea on timeline yet, I guess.
No idea on timeline yet.
Okay, would anyone else like to add to that? Okay, let's move on then. Andrea from Italy, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and Andrea, would you like to ask a question, or shall I read it for you?
You can ask the question on my behalf.
Okay. So Andrea has a question about pen F and power. So this is quite similar to the earlier question. For multi-shoot and night astrophotography, including time-lapse, we need sometimes to use the camera for over an hour, taking hundreds of pictures. With one single battery, this isn't really possible. Do you have any plan to make an external battery grip? So I think this is specific to the Pen F, but maybe relevant to other models.
Thank you.
In regards to the Pen F, we are not planning this kind of power grip, for sure not. Technical wise, it would be also quite difficult. You have to make it then through the normal battery mount, because there is no external connection possible in the Pen F. Other models as EM1 series, yes, we are doing hand grips and power delivery. I don't think that there is something in plan for the EM5 Mark III or other models.
Okay, so not such a great answer, I'm afraid, Andrea, on that one. So okay, let's.
Can I just,
Yeah,
Ian, I'll just throw something in. If you can see this, you can put it in front of my face. Hang on. This is an Olympus battery that's been printed on a 3D printer that's got USB connectors at the bottom here, and is a regular battery. And you connect it up to a 5-volt USB power supply, and it works. I never use this, Andrea, so if you would like it, send me a message and I'll put it in the post to you.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you very much, Paul. And
Thanks,
Andrew, you struck gold.
Officially, we cannot recommend that, of course.
No, of course not. Use it at your own risk.
Yes.
But I think it's working.
Yes, it works. I have tested it. So if you'd like it, you're quite welcome to have it.
Yeah. I'll have to ask you more details about it later. Okay, thanks, Paul, and thanks, Andrea. Okay, next is Derek. Is Derek W around?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, Derek. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
You can now see me.
Ah, yes, there you are. Okay.
At the end of your dreams.
Would you like me to read your question, or do you have it there?
I think it would be better because it went on a bit, and probably you can assess the key elements of it.
Okay, so, well, I'll read it. I'll read it quickly. So Derek wants to know if Michael can describe the camera manufacturing assembly process. How far before release date does manufacturing of the components start? How far before release date does assembly start? How many cameras are assembled in the first and subsequent batches? For the OMD EM1 Mark II, how many batches of cameras were made? Are the cameras redesigned during the run of model? Is the last camera made identical to the first camera in the model range?
Oh, very detailed question. So to be honest, I don't know the worldwide quantities and batches, but I can a bit explain how the process is in when we launch a product. So before a product will be launched, there are so-called PP samples, pre-production samples, which are handmade from the developers in Tokyo. So they're just getting the parts, and they just assemble them by themselves to see what's not going right in the parts and what's wrong in the whole process. And with these PP samples, are we in Europe getting also some of them to make sample images for the launch? And then the second step is that there are so-called IP samples, which are called initial production samples. They are already done on the production line, so it's kind of training for the production line. And those samples will be distributed to the countries or to the regions in Europe to inform dealers and show dealers beforehand the product that they can prepare themselves for the launch, which is roughly 6 weeks before we launch that to the public. And in parallel, of course, the production of the product starts already because the normal production is not shipped by air as the IP samples, but by ship, which takes normally 4 weeks. So as soon as the initial production is done, they already produce the mass production and send them by ship. So that we have in our stock roughly 1 week before we launch enough quantities to sell. unfortunately, I have no figures about quantities worldwide and how many batches and how many reworks will be done. I do have some experience from my past job where I was quite close to the production or to the development, and there, even though that was very low quantities, but there were always ongoing changes. So when faults happened, they countermeasure were found, and there were already ongoing changes. So 99%, the last camera coming out of the factory is not the same as the first camera.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, so just to finish off his question, which I didn't read, he was wondering how far ahead of the release date are cameras made available to testers and influencers?
Yeah, that's the IP or PP sample. So 6 to 8 weeks before the launch, we have it in Europe. I think in Japan they start earlier, but yeah.
Yes, I can remember when I visited Olympus to look at the EM1 Mark I, I actually was able to use one for several weeks before it was launched, and I had to cover the brand and everything with black tape and everything. So that was rather fun. Okay.
So I think for the 150 400s, there were already images posted from Japan instead of the Photo Plus in Japan. And they already communicated that they started testing the lens. So, and that was in February. So when we would have a launch in May, I would already know it. So you can imagine how long beforehand we in Japan they test the lens. So
okay,
or products.
Okay. Anybody else want to add anything to that? Okay. So the next question is from Walty. Are you there, Walty?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello, Paul.
Hello.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, my question is fairly straightforward. The EM1 Mark II, I've had fairly strong rumours that there should have been a version 4 firmware released for it before the EM1 Mark III was launched. Is this still going to happen, or is it dead in the water now?
You talk about firmware 4.0?
Yeah. There was rumoured, I won't say who it's from, but it's within Olympus, that there were likely to be a major upgrade of the Mark II before the Mark III came. And it was likely to be a version 4 firmware.
I didn't hear something about a new major firmware of the EM1 Mark II in the recent 3 months. So I don't think so that there is coming something in near future. But you never know. I was very surprised that, for example, the EM1 first version got the 4.0 firmware, which supports the Pro Photo flashes. And maybe we're getting an EM1 Mark II firmware in future as well.
Well, hope so. It would be a shame not to.
What are you missing?
Oh, because I don't know what's likely to be there. I don't know what I'm missing yet. But the Mark I version 4 firmware was quite a significant upgrade, wasn't it? And there's some quite surprising things in there. So one would hope you get the same sort of upgrade for the Mark II.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we're back to you, Paul, with your question. PDK42.
Unmute my screen here. Yes, so it's a much more general question, Michael, rather than specifically Olympus. So I think everyone sort of agrees that the camera market in general is in steep decline and has been for quite some years, which is affecting all the manufacturers. It seems to me that one of the biggest factors there is that aside from hardcore old grey-haired photographers like everybody here, the average person just no longer sees a camera as a way to take photographs, probably because of mobile phones and things. So the question really is what do you, as a marketing executive and a major camera manufacturer, think of that, and you know, where do you go from here? How do you re-engage the average individual to want to buy a camera like an Olympus and go out and use it rather than using the latest smartphone?
Very good question. I think everybody sees that the photographic market is shrinking. And my personal view is that the photography market would be much smaller than in the past. So it will be a more enthusiast market. However, in our lineup, we have several cameras which looks a little bit different in users than what I see here. For example, when we go to our pen series, the EPL series, 60%, 65% of the users are female, and below 40. I think the major age is between 20 and 35. And that's our strategy, to have kind of step up users from pen over the EM10 to the EM1 series. And therefore the pen series is more into the direction of smartphone photographers, also more touchscreen related, less buttons, easier to use, and this kind of stuff. Also integration of smartphone was much deeper than in the OM very early. And we try to develop them from pen over the EM10, EM5 series up to the EM1 series. Does that help?
Okay.
Yes, that is an interesting response. I mean, I guess where my own head was going, and it's not the way I like to do my photography, but it does seem quite a lot of younger people like to do immediate posting on social media, and it seems that just the sort of you know, the barrier of transferring a photograph from a camera to a phone and then uploading it to social media is just often one step too far. I mean, if Olympus thought about doing, you know, a camera that's connected that you can automatically upload to social media and maybe do very simple editing on it.
Direct connection is not in discussion because I think it's hard to exchange or to replace the phone itself. But when you have seen that the pen series were the first series in our lineup which got the Bluetooth connection, and when you see the functionality that you select the images on your camera while you're shooting, and when you switch off the camera, the images will be transferred automatically because without any additional work from your side to your smartphone. This kind of functionality, I think, will be improved in future. That it's at one hand side faster, and on the other hand side maybe not even more convenient. Also, software side, I would expect technology which supports you to select the best images on your card and this kind of stuff in future. And then the process is much easier to have a camera directly connected to the internet. It's quite difficult because the usage or the user interface of a phone is very, very well known, and everybody would expect that you have similar thing on the camera. And as the camera form factor is different to a smartphone, I think it's difficult to fulfill these needs, and therefore the strategy is more to integrate the phone which you anyhow have to our system as much as possible.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, right.
Can I just butt in there, please, Ian?
Yes.
I think providing that the app on the phone can connect in an intelligent way with the camera, so that you can do the work on the camera to upload the image, even if it's actually using the phone just as a means to do it, that might satisfy most people.
I did get only half of it.
Do you want to say it again, Jeremy?
I think if the app on the phone that's connected to the camera is very intelligent, so that the camera can initiate and control what's uploaded, but it's just using the phone as a method for doing it. So the idea is you use the camera to do all the work, but actually the phone is actually in the background providing the hardware, as it were.
Yeah, actually at the moment it's going in this direction, right? So you, as I described, when the camera is equipped with Bluetooth, you can select the images on your camera you would like to upload to the phone, and as soon as you stop shooting and switch off the camera transfers the images automatically to the phone. There's only the step missing to post them somewhere. I can imagine that this will be in future possible, but that's the way I described. Not to have the functionality on the camera or the same functionality as you have in the phone, but integrate the phone as much as possible into the camera technology.
Yes, I have to say that one of the most frustrating things I find about using the camera, I've got a Mark II, EM1 Mark II, getting the pictures off onto the phone when I'm out and about is, just the Wi-Fi connection is just an absolute nightmare. So that really does need to be improved a lot. I'm sure all of us would agree with that. I'm going to move on now. Tim, is Tim here with his tripod socket question?
Hi.
Hello, Tim.
Sorry, I'm trying to do DIY and listening very well to all of this at the same time. So
excellent.
My question is, I noticed since purchasing my EM1 Mark II that they've moved the tripod socket to off-center. I'm just wondering what the reasons are. I'm not particularly focusing on the rumours about some of them breaking on other cameras. It's just more why it's been done, and obviously the impacts it has with your choice of brackets. Since I've changed my camera, it's been quite complex trying to get a bracket that I'm happy with.
What camera was that?
EM1 Mark II, the tripod socket in the bottom.
That is too far away from the sensor plane, or what is it?
No, it was on my EM1 Mark I, it was in the center on the base of the camera. Whereas on the newer one, it's been moved something like 8 or 16 millimeters forwards towards the front of the camera.
Yeah.
So then the majority of your tripod plates stick outside of the camera unless you go for certain manufacturers, which are quite limiting.
Yeah.
Okay,
can I just explain? I think that what Tim is saying is the socket is still central along the axis, but it's far forward, and I noticed that as well.
Yeah, it's quite complicated in the process when you make a camera, right? So everything has to be somewhere, and thank you, Paul. Everything has to be somewhere in the camera, and in former times the tripod socket tends to move from left to right, backward, forward, and we got always the critics that it's not in the center. So in nowadays it's always in the center. However, you have to find the space where it's fitting to, because it's going inside of the camera. So you have a certain depth of the tripod mount. And when there is something behind, then it's not possible. So I assume that there was no other space to put the tripod mount in. Just simply as it is.
Okay, Tim, does that help?
Yeah, thank you. It's interesting. It's the only reason being because I did some calculations on the forum for if we attach the 300mm lens, assuming you attach that weight and did it from the end of it. And by it moving forwards, it actually seemed to release a certain level of torque stroke stress on the bracket from the lens perspective. But it's interesting that it's more simplistic than that. So thank you.
No. The 300mm lens, you should even use the tripod mount of the lens.
Yeah, exactly. I just didn't
why.
use that because it was heavy. But yeah, you should, like the 150, you should use the bracket. So it's fine. Yeah. No problems. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to say anything? No? Okay, fine. So on to Phil. Are you there, Phil? I can't see you. Okay, I'm going to read Phil's question.
Yeah. Feel free to read it.
There you go. You're on the
feel free to read it.
Okay, fair enough. A while ago, I seem to remember an Olympus explanation how they were able to specifically design lenses to improve their rendition of bokeh. Similarly, I guess the Sigma art lenses. Are there plans to introduce such improved bokeh lenses in the future, in particular a long-range one? Now, once again, I think it's going to be quite difficult for Michael to answer the latter question, but
new products are always difficult to answer. But I think you mean our 1.2 lenses, because there we have a special technology to make this feather bokeh that the background is nicely unsharp. This technology has been developed simply for these 1.2 lenses. Also in production side, you have to be able to adjust the lenses accordingly that they fitting to the standard you defined in the development. And therefore, technology-wise, I think we are able to. I think it's independent of focal length. Whether we are getting a longer focal length with a large aperture, I don't know.
Okay. Thank you. You're quite correct. After I read the article, you certainly brought out the 1.2 lenses. Yes.
Yeah. That was developed for the 1.2 lenses. This technology, because for this feathered bokeh, there is adjustment of the lens elements very important, and therefore you have to measure the effect, how it looks like in the background. And this technology is used for them. And once it's done, you can use that for other lenses as well. So technology-wise, yes, but I have no hints that there's coming something.
Maybe make the comment, it would be nice to see that on one of the longer lenses.
Maybe. What kind of focal length would you love to have?
Oh, something like the 150.
Okay.
Okay, great. Anyone else want to chip in there? Okay, now I'm going to go to one of the later questions, which were posted after I sent questions to Michael. So Bruce Clark, are you online?
Yes.
Hello, Bruce. Right, can you remember your question, or shall I read it for you?
No, I've got it here.
Okay.
Michael, will Olympus start doing the kind of AI image processing that, say, Huawei are excelling at on phone cameras? Ollie RAWs are great to edit, but I often find the JPEGs on my Huawei P30 better than the Ollie ones for quick shots. Obviously, the smaller sensors in phones allow image bursts to be processed for dynamic range, noise, etc. And some processing maybe couldn't be reproduced as RAWs. Also, Huawei are subsampling on mine from 40 to 10 megapixels. I just wondered if you were going to start adding that kind of AI. Obviously, the X has it to some extent, but it's quite a different way of processing images, isn't it?
Can I, before you start, Michael,
yes.
I'm quite experienced with the Huawei phones as well, and just to explain to everyone here, I think the AI that we see in EM1X is all about, it's mainly focused on focusing, isn't it? It's focus mode. But with Huawei, what they do is they basically shoot a high-speed sequence of images to create one image when you just press the shutter button once. And so they're doing a lot of image combining, and it's all very, very clever. They also have AI to do things like identify subjects and work out whether it's a plate of food or an insect or something like that, and they'll apply changes in that way. And I think that Bruce is probably more focused on that, improving the JPEGs in the camera using AI techniques, which it could mean high-speed burst shots for one image.
Yeah. Thanks.
just can answer my personal view on things at this point, because I'm not involved how deep or how far our Japanese colleagues are in terms of software and in artificial intelligence or something like that. But in my personal opinion, in future, hardware will be not as important anymore as it is at the moment. The one who are able to be the first making software intelligent or react intelligently to the subject in front of the lens, respecting the need of photographers, I think will win a lot in the market. And therefore, my personal view is that software will be, or is already very important, but will be more important in future as well. Olympus already starts doing something in software which is quite intelligent, but helpful. So like live composite or lifetime mode we introduced, or when you see our scene mode night portrait is nothing else than, for example, the night mode from Apple, which shoots also more images and stick together, but it's not able to shoot fast moving objects. So there are some technologies already in doing something in this direction, but in future, I think it has to be much more to be competitive also with others.
Thank you. Yes, the obviously with a smaller sensor as well, it allows faster processing, and it would obviously benefit. You know, with the often criticism of the smaller sensor is, you know, more noise and you know, the usual. So if you could do bursts and combine multiple shots seamlessly, then I think that would be a great you know, technology to add.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Okie dokie. Right. Let's move on. Thank you very much, Bruce. So, Bikey John, is John here? Okay, perhaps not, but I'm going to paraphrase his question because it's quite long. He's basically talking about lenses from 4/3, like the 90 to 250 f2.8, because it's a lens he still uses, despite the fact he's using micro 4/3 now. Because it's f2.8, it's a long 2.8 lens, and he's basically asking, again, difficult to answer, but he's basically saying what he would like to see is a long 2.8 lens. F4 is fine, but he's having to shoot at ISO 12,800 at f2.8 for some of the sports photography that he does, shooting rugby actually. So comment on ultra fast telephotos. Are we stuck at f4?
I partly answered that already with the roadmap question. Yeah, no, it's hard to talk about future products. Anyhow, the 90 to 150 is still working, so happy when they are still using them. Actually, the reason why we have long focal length with f4 is the size, to emphasize our advantage in size. And a 2.8 lens would be much bigger. So that's always a trade-off. But maybe when in future we have a complete lineup of the lenses, still some missing, in my opinion. Why not?
I think this is a question which is for feedback to Tokyo.
Yes.
Okay, great. I have a question. I have two questions from John. John GG.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, do you want to ask them?
I'll let you read them. You've got very good reading.
All right, the first one. I would love to see from Olympus a micro 4/3 equivalent of the excellent 4/3 mount Sigma APO macro 150mm f2.8 lens that gives much greater reach than the 60mm. It's weather sealed. You would like it to be weather sealed with IS and capable of pro capture and focus bracketing, and also compatible with the MC14 and MC20. You don't want much, do you?
No, no.
So I think this is another feedback question, but and his second question is about the HDL9. Is it compatible with the Mark III M1?
It is. Yeah, it is.
Oh, it is. Oh, right.
It's compatible, but the thrust of the question is that you can use the HLD9 on the 3 as well as on the 2, but of course it lacks the joystick.
Yes.
Will they bring out specific to the 3 grip that's got a joystick, so that you can use the joystick in portrait mode?
Okay. No, there is no plan to make a new hand grip for the EM1 Mark III. We will use the HDL9, and yes, that's the disadvantage because the grip was there before the camera was made. But the advantage is that when you are switching from 2 to 3, you can still use it. Therefore, there is no plan to have a new hand grip for the EM1 Mark III. That's the first question. And the second question, that was a macro lens, right? You're asking for?
Yes, macro lens.
He wants a longer macro lens.
A longer macro lens.
For things like dragonflies and that are very skittish.
I do hear that very often, as with the short high speed lenses. We already feedback that to Tokyo several times, and I personally would love to have that as well. So I cross the finger with you that we are getting one.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well that sounds good. Okay, Andy Johnson, Bangeo, are you there? Would you like to ask a question, or shall I do it for you? You need the.
Yes. Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, I can hear you. Yes.
Yeah. Well, you've already covered some of the 150 to 400, but it'd be nice to know any more about that. But there's also the 100 to 400 on the roadmap, and I think that would be a very popular lens. Wonder if you can give a time frame for that.
No, unfortunately not.
Okay, short and sweet. All right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
There was another question. I can't remember who it was, but another feedback question, really, basically saying, can we have a 40 to 150 with the with IS? So you could have the extended stabilization. I don't know whether you want to comment on that, but that's definitely feedback.
Definitely a feedback that we hear also very often, since we have this Sync IS technology built in. I have no idea whether they make a second version of the 40-150 or whether there's a plan. There in the roadmap, there's also no hint in this direction. So let's cross the finger, because it makes sense for that lens.
Great.
To have a Sync IS. It would make the lens a little bit bigger, I would assume. But anyhow, it's not the smallest one. So let's cross the fingers.
Okay. And talking about Sync IS, lots of people do ask about, is there any chance of some of the features like the dual IS, which are incompatible with Panasonic, interoperable? Are these never going to become part of the standard, or is there a possibility that they could become interoperable?
To my understanding, that's not defined in the standard how to resolve this issue, or this technology to sync the body IS and the lens IS. And I think there's also a common understanding between, but that's my personal view, between Panasonic and Olympus, that there must be a differentiation between those two brands in the mount, and that there are some technologies which are not shared. And I think this kind of technology is not shared between those two companies. So I would be surprised when there will be a solution in the near future in this direction.
Okay, Fair
So
enough.
also the lens, the aperturing on Panasonic lenses are using different protocols than it's defined in the standard, and using them is quite difficult for Olympus. So, but this is also kind of mutual agreement between those tools that some technologies are just limited to one manufacturer.
Okay, fine. Now back to Jeremy, as you asked lots of questions. So the one I have in front of me. Well, Jeremy, do you want to ask a question in your priority then?
Okay. The EM5 Mark III, I believe, doesn't support Olympus capture, and I was just wondering if we can expect a firmware upgrade at some stage in the future, or whether I need to wait for the Mark IV, or is this a trend that Olympus might produce and only the top range cameras will have capture in the future?
Unfortunately, your last proposal or your last point was the right one. So I think it's limited to the high-end versions in future.
That's unfortunate, but thank you. I'm asking this particularly for the EM5 because the EM5 has always been seen as a more portable version of the EM1. A lot of people don't like the big grip, so they're willing to pay the price, but don't want the slightly bigger and more clunky handling. And I can understand why an EM10 perhaps may omit some functions, but a lot of people would like to see the EM5 with as many things as possible that we can get from the EM1, but just in that smaller format.
Understand, and especially the EM5 is a bit confusing because the EM5 Mark II had it, right?
Exactly.
We were already also very surprised that Japan dismissed this functionality, but I think that's the way they're going to have the EM1 series as a capture for Olympus capture and below not. At the time of the EM5 Mark II, there was no EM1X, so we had only one top model. Now we have two top models. And I think that's also one reason why the EM5 Mark II lost this functionality.
I feel that's a backward step. But I understand what Olympus are doing, and my feedback to them is please reconsider.
Yeah, I will give them that feedback. Let's see whether EM5 Mark III is able to get a firmware update or not in this direction. I really don't know. So I give them the feedback. We got already a lot of feedback in this direction also through our hotline. They have to answer a lot of questions in this direction. And I think Tokyo is aware of that, but every feedback counts, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm aware that it's now gone past the hour. I would just like to ask if anybody else has any questions to ask while Michael is here before we wrap up.
A quick one on the life of the EM1 Mark II. It's good to see it's still being kept on as a parallel model to the Mark III. Do you any idea how long that will be the case?
As long as it's running, so as long as we are selling it.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that mean?
Yeah, that's we reduced the price of the EM1 Mark II to get also a different market there, and we see potential to sell them in parallel. But as we are normally not doing that or not so often, it's also kind of grail. And as long as it's selling, there is no reason to discontinue it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, any more questions?
Can I just add some feedback on the...
to ask why there seems no support for a grip strap on the EM1X, which I got very, very comfortable with using on the EM1 Mark I and Mark II.
Why?
There's no support for a grip strap.
Yeah, the reason, the question was why that is the case.
Yes, indeed.
I don't know.
Okay. Good answer. Good answer.
I asked the same question, but I just got the answer that there are some additional equipment which you can screw underneath to have this functionality.
Yes, I'm busy mutilating a Kenro grip strap at the moment to use the tripod mount on the top strap, but it seemed a little bit of a strange omission is all. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, but I had the same question to the Japanese colleagues why this level of camera doesn't have it, but didn't get a satisfying answer.
Okay.
I heard somebody else trying to type in there. Who was that?
That was me. Going back to the 60mm macro lens, I do find it to be very slow focusing. Is there anything likely to happen on that to actually improve the focusing speed of the lens?
Actually, that's the disadvantage of a macro lens, as you have to have longer ways to focus in to achieve this one-to-one macro functionality. The focusing speed is slower.
Oh, right.
So that's just because of the construction of the lens. So I think there's not really space to improve that.
I have to say that nearly every macro lens I've used has had noticeably slower focusing because it basically has to move the lens elements a longer distance to cover the focus range.
Yeah, that's just because of the construction that you get the one-to-one magnification.
Okay. Any more before I call time?
Can I sneak a question in?
Yes.
Henry. Okay. I've asked this before to Olympus directly. When we have when we change lens, because it's a mirrorless, we tend to have the sensor open. So is there any way that Olympus can add that the shutter is closed while we change lenses?
To be honest,
Canon has actually done that.
Yeah, to be honest, the sensor is less sensitive than the shutter. So the shutter, the shutter lamels, or how do you call these little pieces in English?
The leaves.
The leaves, yeah, they are very thin, and when you hit them, you can hurt the shutter. So they are more sensitive than the sensor. So to be honest, I'm really happy that Olympus is not closing the shutter when you move the lens, remove the lens, because shutter. Also, changing the shutter is much more expensive than changing the infrared filter in front of the lens, so in front of the sensor. So I think that's the better way to do.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
People don't realize that what you see when you look into the mount is not the actual sensor itself. It is actually a piece of glass, and as Michael says, that's quite easily changed. Okay.
No, it's not that easy. You have to dismount the whole camera, but
relatively
it's easier than the shutter.
Yeah, relatively.
Is it ever actually done though? It's probably always changes the whole unit, isn't it?
What was that?
Would they ever change just the glass, or I would have thought they'd change the whole sensor unit, wouldn't they?
It depends on the camera class, I think. At the pen camera, I would assume they changed the whole unit, but on an EM1X, for example, I would say they change parts. It depends on the level of camera, because also how much space you have to have screws on it or changeable parts, or they are glued together at the end of the day. So it depends on the level of camera.
Thanks. Yeah.
Okay.
If there's still time, can I ask a question?
Sure.
I'm using, just recently bought a 1 Mark III, and in most respects, I absolutely love it. But I'm coming from a 5 Mark II background, which I still use. And I'm finding the 1 Mark III incredibly frustrating because of the position of the menu button. With the 5 Mark II, and I think other cameras, I could do everything. I could do everything one-handed. So my grip stays the same, and I can just use the one hand for the menu button. I understand that, I mean, you can't have a million buttons, so they just don't fit, and I get that. I like the jog, the joystick. But is there any way that we could somehow get a programmable function that would allow me to move that menu button back to the right side to display something else? We can program every other button. We just can't touch the menu.
Yeah, I note this as a feedback. I know that some people don't like that position, but as the joystick came in, the button has to go somewhere, right?
No, agreed. And from a manufacturing and a user interface point of view, I get it. But I just, it seems to me, and maybe I'm oversimplifying, but it should be easy enough to just reprogram and let me repurpose maybe the delete key or something, which I never use anyway.
Okay.
It's a very interesting question, because in fact, Olympus are well known for their programmable function buttons, but there are just some functions that you can only program to some buttons. There must be a reason for it, but nobody seems to know.
Yeah, I don't know either. I just have experience from my older company that some buttons are programmable and some are not. It depends how you make the electronic layout at the end of the day inside. I don't know whether the menu button can be, in theory, moved to somewhere else, but I get your point. The menu button is on the wrong place.
I guess the real problem is that if you reprogram the menu button to something which wasn't sensible, you could never get back to the menu to change it back again.
Oh yeah, there's a big risk of getting yourself into no man's land. Agreed.
If there's one thing you want always to work, it's the menu button.
Or you need a reset camera button.
Yeah. Okay, then leave it menu and just let me have 2 menu buttons. That'll work.
Or buy a Mark II.
Yeah, right.
John, can I just ask you where you're hailing from?
I'm in Ottawa, Canada.
Well done. That's great. I think this is the first time we've had Canada online, so that's great. We have Canada, Malaysia, there's probably some Australians here, and Italy, Europe. So this is just fabulous. I'm going to say thank you very much to everyone now, because we've gone way past the scheduled ending time. Thank you for a fantastic session with Michael, and thank you, Michael, for your time and your insight.
Pleasure.
And next week, of course, we have Andy Rouse, who is a fantastic Olympus shooting wildlife photographer that many of us are familiar with, and I hope to see you all for that one. Okay?
Thank you.
Have a great weekend,
Thanks,
guys.
Michael.
Bye.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you,
Ian.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael.
You're welcome. Bye bye.
Yes, thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye.